Okay, I'm connected. We can start when we're ready, and I'd be happy to take a roll call.
Yeah, I'm all set, Pat. So we'll go ahead and start the meeting, convene the meeting. If you could take roll call, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, Gina Montez, City of Avondale.
Here.
Roger Klinginger, City of Buckeye.
Here.
Ryan Peters for the City of Chandler. Autumn Grooms for the City of El Mirage. Dave Trimble for the Town of Fountain Hills.
Here.
Larry Goodman for the Town of Gilbert. Kevin Phelps for the City of Glendale.
Present.
Julie Arundel from City of Goodyear.
Here.
Reed Kempton from Maricopa County.
Here.
Chris Brady, City of Mesa.
Here.
Eric Strunk from the City of Peoria.
Present.
Ed Zerker for the City of Phoenix.
Present.
Bruce Gardner for the Town of Queen Creek.
Here.
Ratna Corpella for the City of Scottsdale.
Present.
Mike Gent for the City of Surprise.
Present.
Stephen Methvin for the City of Tempe.
Present.
Mary Goodman for the Town of Gilbert. Autumn Grooms for the City of El Mirage. Or Ryan Peters for the City of Chandler. Chair, we're set to begin.
Great. We'll go ahead and do that. Before we get into it, just the general reminder. If you have a question, we have a chat room. Be sure to enter your comments there. Try to mute your microphones so others can speak and we can maintain the bandwidth. And with that, we'll formally start with item number 1, public comment. The comments for today's meeting have been taken in written format and will be entered into the official minutes of the meeting. Pat, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, sir.
Great. We'll jump into item 2, and that's the Chief Executive Officer's report. And I'll call on Scott Smith to conduct the report. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Eric. Mr. Chair, appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today, and missed you all last month, so it's good to be back together with an action-packed agenda. So I'm going to be very, very quick in my report and make you aware of a couple things. First of all, I wanted to let you know that Valley Metro, working closely with the City of Phoenix, is updating our Title VI program. You can see the time frame there. We will be presenting this and working with your staff in both our service planning and financial planning working groups to make sure that we talk about service change and equity policy and fair equity policies as they relate to Title VI. We'll need to take these policies through a public review process, which will happen in late March and April. They'll be presented to have a draft update after those activities in June and request board action in either August or September. So just want to make you aware of that. And if you need any more information, please communicate directly to me or through your staff on any one of these committees and working groups that we have. The next thing I just wanted to sort of point of pride. This is not my doing, but a lot of other people in our organization. Valley Metro was named the 2021 Best Workplace for Commuters. We take our role in what we do very seriously, and of course, we try to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. And we have a vibrant program for our agency employees and contractors to encourage commuting and to make it as available as possible. So kudos to our staff who are in charge of that, and then just want to let you know that I'm proud to be part of that organization. Last thing is the calendar for upcoming meetings. We are, Pat, you want to move that forward? There. Audit and Finance Subcommittee is March 4th, and you can see the boards. And the next TMC RMC is April 3rd. and the other meetings in April 4th. We will continue to conduct these via virtually, and hope for the day with all the somewhat good news, knock on wood, that's coming out, that we'll be able to get together in person in the not too distant future. So, Mr. Chair, that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Do any of the board members have any questions of what they just heard? All right, congratulations on the recognition. That's nice to hear that. So thanks for sharing that. We'll move on to item number 3, minutes. And these are the minutes from the January 6, 2021 joint TMC meeting. Any questions on any of the content? If not, I'd like to request a motion and a second to approve the minutes from January 6.
Mr. Chairman, Roger Klingler, I move approval.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Ed Zerker.
Thank you. All those, any opposition? I always say that the wrong way. It sounds like there's a war brewing and there's not. Any opposed? Great, thank you so much. With that, we will jump into the consent agenda, and I believe we have 6 items. And I'd like to ask any of the members if they would like any of these pulled for presentation or discussion. Okay, hearing no requests, I'd like to entertain a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda for today's meeting. Any motion?
Ed Zerker, move approval.
Thank you.
I'll second Julie Goodyear.
Thanks, Julie. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll move on from the consent agenda and we'll jump right into the regular agenda. We've got 2 items for action and 5 items for information. I'd like to call on Mr. Smith to go over items 5 and 6, and I believe they're kind of interrelated. So I'm not sure if your presentation touches on both or what, but I'll leave that to you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to turn it over to Paul Hodgins, who is leading our effort in the fare collection, and he can give a presentation on items 5 and 6. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I, in turn, will turn it over to Tyler Olson, the budget manager, who's actually going to do the presentation for you. Thank you. Go ahead, Tyler.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Joint Committee. I will walk you through the Retail Network and Customer Service Awards. Both of these awards that we are requesting today will support the future fare collection system replacement project that we are currently working on with City of Phoenix and VIX Technology. I'll give some context for that project in the coming slides, then go into details on how these 2 awards will support that. Slide. Just a minute, we're getting caught up on the slides here. Sorry about that. There you go, thank you. So over the last several years, we have worked in collaboration with City of Phoenix, incorporating input from member cities through the Fare Policy Working Group and committees and boards, as well as other workshops. Our top goals for the project were to offer better payment solutions for our riders with enhanced features such as fare capping and mobile ticketing, improve data collection for our most important metrics, ridership and revenue, have a true point of sale control over reduced fare media, linking reduced fare ID to passengers' smart cards, something we don't have today. This will have a great impact on reducing the amount of fare abuse that we see today. Our new system will help us get there. We also wanted to phase the project in such a way that it would result in the smoothest transition for our customers, moving from our legacy system to the new improved solution. On to features. So the new system will include mobile ticketing, reloadable smart cards for the public. Today, we only allow the reloadable smart cards for corporate accounts, so that'll be a major change for the future. Also, fare capping, which we're really excited about. Essentially, customers can tap their way to earn daily and monthly passes, It's really great value for the customers. So, customers that can't afford to pay a monthly pass up front, they can end up spending more in day passes for the same period. So in the future, the system allows customers, in today's world, all-day pass is $4. A monthly pass is $64. So if someone purchases 16 all-day passes, they'll reach the value of a monthly pass and ride the rest of the month for free. So a really great thing for our customers. Each rail station will also have 2 brand new ticket vending machines in which customers will be able to purchase and load value onto smart cards, along with multiple validators for riders to tap their smart cards and mobile tickets. Each bus will also have a validator for the same purpose. Customers will be able to purchase and load value onto smart cards at our retail locations as well, which I'll tell you about shortly. So this project has 2 major phases. The first phase really focuses on installing validators both on board buses and at rail stations and rolling out the mobile app. Ultimately, this prepares the infrastructure in place for phase 2. So click. Phase 2 will launch the reloadable smart card and ticket vending machines. Passengers will also be able to load value onto their accounts and cards online, over the phone through customer service, and at retail locations. Auto loading will also be available for those that want to set up thresholds to automatically add value to their card each month. Some more great news for unbanked customers. They'll be able to load cash onto both their mobile and smart card accounts. Next slide. So to tell you a little bit more about the procurements. Again, we approached this project regionally, and that's even down to the procurements. City of Phoenix released a procurement for the majority of what we offer today and made the award to VIX Technology last March, so about a year ago. While Valley Metro released the procurements for retail network and customer service. The retail network today is currently managed by City of Phoenix. So this retail network is not new. It's really a replacement of that service. However, we will need to enhance the customer service function with the different options for payment today and the new system, that is. Moving on to the Valley Metro procurements. Next slide. So for the Retail Network Award, InComm will manage all aspects of the retail network, from distributing and replenishing smart cards to managing the retailers and revenue. InComm will only sell full fare cards to retailers. However, customers who have already applied for and received their reduced fare ID can load value onto their cards there as well. We will also utilize InComm services as a fare media supplier to the region. Click. Some of the benefits, lower costs for the long term. Smart cards cost around $2 a piece and last up to 10 years, so much longer than today's pass types. The equivalent cost of providing the existing monthly pass type for that same period is over $7. Program makes it much simpler for the customer as well. They can essentially grab the Valley Metro card off the gift card display and add value to that card, or they can take their already purchased smart card into the retail location and add value as well. I would like to note that although we have a not to exceed amount that we're proposing, for this vendor, we will only be billed on actual purchases and loads. So it's entirely based on acceptance levels of that card. Valley Metro and City of Phoenix are also exploring options to recover a portion of the expenses by charging a nominal fee to customers. This is very common at other agencies as well. It really creates an incentive to retain the card instead of carelessly disposing it at bus stops or stations like we've seen or heard about at other agencies. It would also be an option to provide that $2 back in credit for a free ride, encouraging ridership, and also they would get that credit after they logged their card into the website, so that essentially, they'd register it, they'd have more benefits online and more security over their account if their card's ever lost or stolen. For the Customer Service Award, VIX Technology will provide a comprehensive customer service team. Now, we are already performing the regional customer service function today. However, this supplemental team will specifically support the new fare features and multi-channel processing options for our customers. The types of calls and support required for the new fare collection system will be significantly different than those supported today, including payment processing over the phone, which has significant payment card industry or PCI risk that we have considered. Another very large effort they will support is the reduced fare rollout. In order to purchase a reduced fare media in the future system, customers will need to apply and be certified by a Valley Metro representative that they meet the reduced fare eligibility requirements. So VIX will have a local presence here and staff available to support the intake of customers and the applications for reduced fare, as well as support Valley Metro outreach events that really need to happen before phase 2 goes live. We want to get these cards in our customers' hands as soon as we can. And that effort could also include being part of a mobile unit that could go to scheduled reduced fare sign-up events at community centers, senior centers, and similar locations in the Valley. Some of the benefits, outsourcing customer service support to a third party for this type of launch is considered an industry best practice. VIX is awarded the larger fare collection system replacement project, as I mentioned. They know their software the best, and they have done this type of work before at other properties. The contract is also structured in such a way that we can basically tailor the service levels to our customers' needs. So based on volume and peak periods, we can make those adjustments to add or reduce as needed for peak periods. Also, the base term of 5 years will get us through the reduced fare rollout and implementation, which is a big lift, previous slide, allowing us the option later to potentially bring the scope in-house once a steady state of operations has been achieved. So a lot of flexibility there and a really big effort getting the reduced fare media out to our customers' hands. With that, the recommendations that we are seeking today are on the screen. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
All right, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for the presentation. The question I have is not so much about the vendor selection process. It's about the term of the contract. The only thing that concerns me is just the change in technology, and what's going to be around and how we're going to do things 5 years from now, 7 years from now. Where does this allow for the things we don't know that may come about in technology and how we capture this kind of activity? So how does that build in? Just when I think about point of sales and doing those transactions, how that's just evolving so quickly in today's world. And I get it for the first 5 years. I think you made a good case for that. I guess what I'm concerned about is after that, what happens if the technology is changing so rapidly? What options do we have? Just assuming, just the way the kiosk or anything that we're assuming today might be outdated in 5 years. So share your thoughts with me on that.
Mr. Brady, I'd be happy to answer that. So the main project that's being managed by the City of Phoenix for all the hardware and software, one of the specifications there is that it's not to be proprietary. It needs to be an open system, and it will allow a lot of flexibility to change some of the hardware, to work through the back end, to address some of those changes within that contract. So the open system really allows that flexibility. But that's more on the hardware and the back end side. Whatever changes come about after 5 years or in the next 5 years, updates to the main fare collection system, we would reflect, we would have the opportunity to make some adjustments to our either the customer service network or to our retail network vendors to address any changes to the overall system.
Okay, I'm just assuming there's gonna be new technology in 5 years and we're all gonna go, you know, we don't want to be using 10-year-old technology. At some point, we're gonna want to be the latest. So as long as we have some flexibility, it sounds like if that's built in, I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions the committee has?
Yeah, I've got some questions.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, this is Kevin. So just a couple of things. First, on the question side, can staff walk me through the PCI risk element? You've identified a $17 million risk to the organization because of PCI risk. And so am I to believe then that the way this contract is established is that we're 100% fully identified on any kind of risk for any kind of, intrusion into the PCI network?
Oz, do you want to take that one? I think the PCI compliance is more of the IT realm.
Certainly. By having someone fully outside of our network doing this task, our network is not in scope. We do not have to undergo PCI compliance testing. We do not have to harden our systems according to those guides. We can do the more standard levels of security for a credit card processing business. When it comes to full risk, we still need to retain insurance to cover the residual risk since we are the ones who are involving them as the vendor. We're hiring them as the vendor. Valley Metro is still going to be the name on all of the processing documents. We're going to be the name that people know, and we're going to be the people that the payment card industry council will come to if there is a breach. So it moves a lot of the risk, but there is still some residual risk, which is easily covered with insurance.
And that's kind of what I assumed. And when I see that the staff report says a significant reason for going this route versus doing it in-house is the PCI risk, but the reality is we still have that PCI risk. I just need to understand, did we calculate another model to where if we're going to have to fully insure it anyway, is that really then a risk is that really the risk that led to the decision to go this direction?
Yes, it is, because of the level of effort and expense that we would have to do on our networks to cover it ourselves. So it reduces the likelihood of realization of the risk. You have someone whose day-to-day business is handling these transactions and making sure that they remain secure. So it's a better level of effort, a reduction of likelihood in the realization of that risk. And we don't have to cover all of the risk because some amount of it, and I do not have that exact number at fingertip, is transitioned to the vendor. We can just insure the residual. And the insurance was included in the cost assessments, which this request is based upon.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
A second question then, help me with is there any offset of cost regarding customer service? Obviously did I hear it right that the city of Phoenix currently provides that customer service? So there's really no offset here. It was part of the way we approach the partnership with Phoenix. They're more heavily invested on the equipment and that side of it, and we're going to be taking on the customer service, do we have an offset for customer service?
Mr. Phelps, I can answer that question. So City of Phoenix currently performs the retail network function. As mentioned, the media costs with today's media and today's fare collection system is more expensive than it will be in the future with the lifespan of the reloadable smart cards, as well as some of the recoveries that we're investigating, such as the $2 nominal fee to register your card, in which you might get a free ride. That will help offset the cost of that network as well. So I think that combined with savings, looking at this holistically, there will be a reduction overall. The customer service portion of this is new above and beyond what we have today. It's a much more complex fare collection system that will require more training on how to handle, PCI, payment card industry practices, and, with the website, being able to look up account information, process transactions over the phone, all types of different inquiries. We're essentially needing additional customer service with that skill set to do that.
And Kevin, if I could, this is Scott. Right now, Valley Metro runs the customer service for the entire region, including covering for Phoenix Transit. That customer service is primarily route and other issues, but if somebody has a problem with a vending machine or a ticket, they would call, they're currently calling our existing customer service number, and then they pass it on. I think what Tyler is explaining is that because this customer service that would be related to the new fare medium is so much more extensive and technical in nature, we would add the capabilities with VIX, and they would handle only those customer service issues related to the fare system. Our existing customer service would continue to handle general questions and other issues that come up through that. But we run that right now, but this is far beyond their expertise and ability to handle that right now. So we're adding those capabilities to our customer service.
Well, thanks, Scott. I mean, to be honest, I look at almost a $2 million a year customer service initiative as being incredibly significant, especially when we really kind of think we're moving towards, smarter platforms for how we transact business as an efficiency measure, in addition to being more friendly to the consumer. And this amount, to me, kind of, to be honest, just kind of took my breath away. I guess the last question that I had was regarding, I know there's an exploration of charging the customer initial lease base cost for the cards. I understand they're $2 to $2.50 a card, but that hasn't been decided. And it would seem to me that we should at least charge for the initial cost so that people have an incentive, not just to toss it. And I think a lot of people may just toss it because they're not paying attention to it. But there's a lot of this cost is that replacement. We'll be getting this in the next item. I mean, that's again a fairly large number for just the for the replacement of the cost. So, when do you expect to have a decision made on the model for how we're going to charge customers for this? Is that something that is going to happen later down the road? Because I see them as being somewhat intertwined.
Yes, Mr. Phelps, we have several fare policy issues, not just with fees for the cards, but how we're going to manage the fare policy in the future that we're working through right now. We expect probably by fall to have that through the committee process to get some decisions from the board and the Phoenix City Council on what that fare policy looks like. And those fees for card fees would be part of that fare policy.
Okay, that's my question. It just still seems to be, I mean, between the two, we're talking 35 million almost over a 10-year period. Just seems to be, I'm just having, as I said, a hard time wrapping my arms around what in reality is the ticket machines are certainly proprietary type of technology, but the loading of a smartphone, the loading of money onto a medium, and then the back office exchange and accounting for that is rather straightforward technology, I should say. I mean, I'm not a technologist, but I can certainly point to a lot of different private sector companies that implement that kind of technology on a daily basis. And I've just been struggling with the total. I may be the only board member that was concerned about this, so I'll cede it over to the rest of the board, but it has caught me a little bit, it kind of challenged to trying to get to say yes on this.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. One of the things that we looked at is really creating a not to exceed. We don't know what the customer service demand will be, what the call volumes will be. So we tried to look at some other areas where VIX has implemented and see what kind of volumes they have. But we've estimated, I would say on the high end, just to be safe, but we're only going to pay for the customer service that we need. We do see an immediate need on the reduced Fair ID rollout, some support there. But, once the system is more established, we may be able to pull back. We just, once we see how much the smart card and mobile tickets are adopted in the system and how well the system works, we're hoping we don't need to spend all of that.
Yeah, and if I could add something too, I mean, Mr. Brady talked about technology that's out there. I think in the industry, people are moving toward the technology that actually could be, well, I won't say could be implemented, but the idea that it's completely a hands-free kind of experience, that you literally would have an amount on an app on your phone or wherever it is. You'd walk into a bus or walk onto a train, and the train would automatically connect with your phone and charge your account. So that you go away and you don't need things like smart cards. That would be the perfect world. We do have other issues, such as equity issues, Title VI issues. That means that you can't design a system that would shut out disproportionately. And so you have to design a system that allows for those other kinds of meetings. We're moving away from paper because I think, as Tyler said, paper actually is more expensive in the long run than these cards are because they're all disposable. And I think we'd like to move away from that. But as technology expands and maybe it becomes better, this whole expense around these smart cards and everything may be able to be eliminated. And that is, like you mentioned, more of a software issue because the hardware is purchased by the rider, and all we have to do is get the beacon or the communicator on the bus or the train to be able to connect with whatever the device is. And we'll look at that and try to move from that while still maintaining our Title VI obligations and serve the customer. So as Paul said, these are big numbers. Taken in context with where we want to go and the cost that would be incurred to accomplish that, we think that over the long run, it's still less expensive than continuing on with our existing proprietary system, which requires paper tickets and platinum card type things, which still required to be taken care of.
Well, great. Thank you for that presentation. Are there
I have
any?
a question.
Yes, go right ahead.
Just what have other cities done with this VIX system? Who else has used it, and where have they used the VIX customer call center?
Mr. Zerker, so VIX specifically has been involved in Dallas's system, delivering the mobile app, I believe one of their subs, as well as this newer version of the ticket vending machine in Canada. Yep. As well as they have same devices in, I think it's an older generation down in Tucson, Sunlink. The Canadian city is Edmonton, by the way. But I know they've done just customer service in some areas, and I don't recall off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that information to the group.
So I know for my mayor, that's always an important question. So I just suggest when you have this for the full board, you should have a section about the experience of other cities with this technology and with the customer call center. I think it would be good. When will the customers, when will the riders start using the Fair Media and the call center?
So the call center services, that would start as soon as we begin our reduced fare rollout ahead of phase two. Phase two is currently scheduled for roughly end of fiscal year 23. I want to say May of 23. So essentially, the customer service team is going to be very busy helping get the reduced fare in hands, get those applications processed, photo IDs in place ahead of the launch of phase two, in which everyone can start using the new smart card media at that time. Because then the ticket vending machines and the validators will be in place along with the retail network.
So 2 years from now.
And the mobile, right. The
Is that right? Roughly 2 years from now?
Yes, just a little over 2 years. Yep.
Okay, and then I noted that that Incom, in the selection, Incom had a lower score technically than VIX, but they were very superior on pricing. Was there some assessment as to any risk of splitting the system? There would certainly be something to be said for VIX handling everything, but apparently there was enough of a difference that was overcome. Is that the case, Paul?
So I can answer that. Essentially, Incom has done this work with VIX at other properties. There was some, as part of the VIX technology, we saw that the pricing was a little bit high and there was potentially an extra position that the panel felt wasn't necessarily needed, and that the better value would have been Incom on that side.
Okay, I think that also would be helpful. I know my mayor will ask questions about that, so I think it's helpful to note where else Incom and VIX have collaborated or been used in that way. So those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, hearing none. These are action items, and I believe the request is to have a motion and a second for both at the same time. That's appropriate. The first would be the 10-year retail sales network contract with Incom is in an amount not to exceed the amount 10.217 million. And the second would be another 10-year contract with customer service network contract with VIX, not to exceed an amount of 24.166 million. Would anyone like to make a motion to move forward with these? And second?
I'll move approval.
Do I have a second?
I'll second this, Roger.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All those opposed? Okay, the motion passes. With that, we will move on to item number 7, which is for information only. And this is on an East Valley High Capacity Transit Study update. And I'll turn it back over to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Eric. We wanted to let you know that what's going on out there, and there are some of your cities that are anxiously looking at ways to expand their transit and transportation. And one in particular is the cities of Tempe, Mesa, and Chandler over the years have been involved and asked Valley Metro to conduct a variety of studies as it relates to high capacity corridors. We did some more specific studies for the cities of Mesa and Tempe. A lot of this driven by the pending completion of the Tempe streetcar and how that might be extended, or other high capacity transit could be extended in other corridors in East Valley. We wanted to give you an idea some of those results of those studies, and I'd like to turn it over to Omar Peters, who led that. Omar, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So Omar Peters, Manager of Capital Planning, and I think Scott gave a very good introduction, so we can move on to the next slide, please. So this map here shows how these three studies all interact. So again, the three studies are the Tempe Mesa Streetcar Feasibility Study. So that's kind of the brownish box where it covers both two areas in Tempe and Mesa. So this is the study looking at possible extensions of the Tempe streetcar service, so the blue line there. So we're looking focus in the downtown Tempe area, and then going east to the Fiesta District, West Mesa area. So covering Riverview, Mesa Riverview, down south to MCC, the former Fiesta Mall, the Fiesta District area. The second study, the Fiesta District Alternatives Analysis, that's the blue shaded area. That's just in the city of Mesa. And again, that's focused in the Fiesta District area. So again, starting north in the Riverview, Sloan Park area, with the Cub Spring Training game area, going south to MCC, the former Fiesta Mall, and then including downtown Mesa. And finally, the Arizona Avenue, excuse me, the Arizona Avenue study. So that is the large purple area. So let's really focus on the downtown Chandler area and really looking to see connections that can be made there with high capacity transit. And when we speak of high capacity transit, and for this purpose, we're talking about bus rapid transit, BRT, modern streetcar, like the Tempe streetcar system, and light rail. Next slide, please. So why are we concerned about and looking at these studies? So as we know, one big reason is just the future growth that is predicted for these areas. So here is just a few figures I pulled out. So in the Tempe Mesa area, so again, at that previous slide, we're looking at a 50% estimated increase in people, in residents in that area. And this is by the year 2040 with data from MAG, or partners of MAG. Similarly, looking at a 58% increase in households that do not have cars in that area. And then in the Arizona area, we see also some data that really tells us we should be looking at multimodal options, the increase in employment, and then the high number of trips that will be made in that Arizona Avenue area. So again, that purple area in the previous map. So as we know, with the growth that is estimated for those areas, that there really needs to be a look at looking at multimodal ways of moving people around in all three of those study areas. So that's the main purpose. Next slide, please. From previous studies, we have seen and shown that these areas do have a high propensity for high capacity transit. So there's a high need for putting investment in transit. And there are previous studies that show that. Two recent studies, again, coming from MAG, is the Regional Transit Framework Study, the update that was completed in 2019, and the Bus Rapid Transit Feasibility Study, which is soon to complete. Those plans and local plans and studies are really showing that these areas, again, have a high propensity of transit. So these studies are really a next step, the studies we're talking about today, in seeing how high capacity transit can be implemented in these areas. Yes, next slide, please. So these three studies, they took two different kind of tactics we took. So the Tempe Mesa Streetcar Feasibility Study, that was a feasibility study where we're really looking to see with streetcar, how we potential extensions of that system. So we're looking at multiple corridors was the goal or the outcome. The Arizona Avenue study and the Fiesta District study, those we were looking at to find a singular corridor where best would be able to fit multiple modes. And give a hit next, please. So for the feasibility study, we're looking at a single mode, just that modern streetcar. For the Arizona Avenue analysis, the Arizona Avenue study and the Fiesta District study, we're looking at a mix of modes. So bus rapid transit, streetcar, and light rail. And next again. The feasibility study really is a technical analysis. So both of the feasibility study on the Arizona Avenue and Fiesta District study, it's a very technical analysis where we're looking at a lot of data to understand the future movement of people. So looking at future employment, future population, future travel trends, and then also the constructability along these corridors of these high capacity transit. The feasibility study, the feasibility study really focused on the technical analysis, so there wasn't a lot of community input. Whereas the alternatives analysis, both the Fiesta District and the Arizona Avenue, was focused on a lot of technical information, but also a lot of community input. Next, please. So just a quick recap of what the community outreach looked like. And these studies began back in 2017. So obviously these photos showing people in a room together, that's pre-COVID, a lot of this work was done. So included key stakeholder meetings where we meet with businesses along the corridors that we're looking at. So have one-on-one meetings, sitting down with key stakeholders, usually businesses. We have had a strong online presence, so either with a actual website and then times when we have an online survey to collect information. And various public meetings throughout the process. And these photos, again, are showing how we have open houses, send out notices to invite people to talk about the goals and the outcomes of the studies. So the outcomes of the study. So we'll first start with this map. And again, this is looking at the Tempe and Mesa area. So we're looking at both the Tempe-Mesa Streetcar Feasibility Study, the extension of the Tempe Streetcar, and then the Fiesta District Alternatives Analysis. Looking at how the Tempe Mesa streetcar system, we're looking at, again, various corridors to where the streetcar system could potentially be extended. So that's why we have multiple corridors shown. The top corridor, so the number 1 listed here, based on the data, again, the very technical analysis, we really seen that as the top corridor to pursue. So that is along Rio Salado East, going east to Mesa, so really connecting from the Marina Heights area through Tempe Marketplace and then Stone Park and Mesa Riverview in Mesa. The orange line, the Dobson Southern Country Club, number 3 listed here, that was the main recommendation that came out of the Fiesta District Alternatives Analysis. So really identifying a way to connect, again, Mesa Riverview down through the Dobson corridor, and connecting to MCC, Mesa Community College, the former Fiesta Mall, and then heading back north to connect to downtown Mesa, and 2 connection points to the existing light rail. Next slide, please. With the Arizona Avenue study, so again, the study in Chandler, the blue line here really shows the main, the final recommendation as an outcome that came from that study. We do see some opportunity to connect further north. So the dotted line you see there, to connect through parts of Gilbert and into Mesa. So we really see that they'll warrant some further coordination with the cities of Mesa and the town of Gilbert to connect to the Fiesta District, a big opportunity to connect to the Fiesta District, and that's that green line shown there, and the existing light rail. But further south, again, that solid blue line, the recommendation is to connect to downtown Chandler, and with an opportunity, if this is bus rapid transit, to go just a little bit south and east to connect to the existing park and ride. One thing to note about both this study and the Fiesta District study, the main outcome was a route, but not a recommendation on the mode. So the mode is still looking, it can be either one of the 3 high capacity transit modes, either bus rapid transit, modern streetcar, or light rail. Next slide, please. So one of the outcomes, and we did this as part of the Arizona Avenue, is really just getting an understanding of how does future transportation, so with the innovation in transportation that we're seeing, how does transit and how will these future corridors fit into that transit picture? So if we hit next, please. So we looked at a few scenarios. So that's what we show on the left here, and then looked at how the, by very, very preliminary modeling information, modeling data, how would the number of riders predicted out for 50 years, how would that change? So the baseline scenario, the blue line, is really just a continuation of the existing. So there's no autonomous vehicles, no big improvements in transit. We're just continuing the existing. And then each scenario we go up in kind of the bells and whistles that are added on. So scenario 1, autonomous vehicles are out there, but really people own and use those as they do a private car. So each household privately owned autonomous vehicle. Existing transit is more of the same of what we have now. There's no big improvements. So really see where that line falls, that we've seen, if anything, a diminishing of ridership. The yellow line, scenario 2, improves the kind of the proliferation and the use of autonomous vehicles a bit. So there's personally owned autonomous vehicles, but there's also a situation where autonomous vehicles are being shared, such as like an Uber Lyft situation where someone calls up a car, use it, and then don't have to worry about it again. We also, in this scenario, looking at autonomous vehicles are being used for connecting to transit, so more of a microtransit situation. And again, you see where that line falls. And then the final one, scenario 3, again, that's kind of the all-in. So personally owned autonomous vehicles, shared autonomous vehicles, so Uber and Lyft type situation, but a lot of transit investment also. So high capacity transit along Arizona Avenue, the previous map we showed. We have autonomous buses, so that saving in operation costs, then leading to an increase in other transit services. And really that's where we see the model is saying that there will be the highest ridership in that scenario. So the main takeaway I took from this is really that there's a, when you put a multimodal system out there, people use the multimodal system. So by putting plans and policies in place for around autonomous vehicles and the use of autonomous vehicles that allow for multimodal use means that there'll be a multimodal outcome. Next slide, please. So just talking more about the next steps of where do we go from here with these studies. Spoiler alert, is not to build yet. We don't yet have the transit market or the funding to do these, but what are the next steps? So the first one is really just building that transit market. So we have existing service in each of those areas that we showed along those corridors. So really it is to increase the frequency, the span of service, the hours, and the speed and reliability of the service, make it a more competitive service that we have right there now, really to grow that market, grow the culture of using transit along those corridors. Next, please. Now with land use, so we see that we need to build up the land use so it's transit supportive. So have more plans and policies in place that encourage transit-oriented development, affordable housing, higher mix of uses, high intensity of uses, and then create places that are safe for people to use transit, safe to connect to a bus stop, safe to connect to a future transit stop. So really encourage people to use transit. Next, please. There's also an opportunity of doing early action projects. So yes, the market may not be there yet. The funding may not be available yet to do these larger high capacity transit services, but there may be an opportunity to do an early action project, such as establishing a service using buses and doing a circulator or a local bus along that route if it does not exist. So we have identified the corridors. If there's no service there or doing that exact routing, maybe there's an opportunity to put in a service at a low cost that does that routing. And again, just starting to build that transit market. And then finally, the biggest thing is really starting now with coordinating regionally. So as we know, the Regional Transportation Plan on the way with MAG, and also the conversation around Prop 400, the extension Prop 400. So we know that these, the 3 recommendations that have come from these studies have been submitted by the cities in a call for projects for the new RTP. So continue that process, continue that coordination across boundaries to build that future system. And next, I believe that's the conclusion. So these 2 images here, just wanted to end on that. Part of the studies did look at creating a vision of what these transit areas can look like. So on the left is along Dobson Road, on the right is Arizona Avenue. But I'll stop here now and send it back over to Mr. Smith for any questions.
Thank you, Omar, and I thank you for that presentation. And Eric and members of the committees, what we want to do is give you a glimpse of the kind of work that our exceptional staff, and especially Omar's team, does for cities. Usually this is done at your request, and I just want to give you a glimpse as to some of the important work they do in helping us to plan our future. They're available for you and your staff to work with, use their expertise, and use the services that they provide. And this is just an idea of some of the good things they can do for 3 cities in the East Valley. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you for any questions or anything.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, Mr. Peters. That was a very nice, robust presentation. Do any of the committee members have any questions of the presentation? All right, thanks again for the good work there. And Mr. Smith, we'll move on to item number 8. It's our quarterly report. It's an informational item. Do any of the committee members have questions? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to item number 9, travel expenditure and solicitation. Same concept, it's an informational item. Any questions of the committee member? Great, we'll keep moving along then. Number 10, does anyone have a request for a future agenda item or would like to report on a current event as it relates to transit? I'll throw that open to the group here. Okay, I'm not hearing anything there. And we'll move on to the last item, next meeting. Just a reminder, we'll be meeting on Wednesday, April 7th, 2021 at 11 a.m. So that'll be the TMC joint meeting, April 7th, 2021. And with that, I think we'll move on to the next committee meeting, the Transit Management Committee meeting. So if we're all good, we'll go ahead and do that. So again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Transit Management Committee meeting. Pat, I don't know if you have a need to take roll call. I think no one's gone anywhere unless you'd like to do it.
No, sir, we're all set.
Great, we'll move forward then. Under public comment, everything's been submitted in writing ahead of time. Do you have anything you'd like to report on?
No, we're all set to go. I didn't receive anything yet.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes from January 6th. To the group, if not, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of January 6th.
Chairman, it's Roger. I move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second, David.
Great, thank you. Any opposed? Good, we'll move on to the consent agenda item. And we have 3 items on the consent agenda today. I'd like to just go ahead and ask the committee if they would like any of those discussed individually before we call for a motion. Any requests? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to request a motion and a second to move these to the Board of Directors for approval. Do I have a motion and a second?
I'll move approval. This is Ed.
Thank you, sir.
Second, Julie and Goodyear.
Thanks, Julie. Any opposed? Okay, I don't hear any. So we'll move on to item number 4. And I think it's hard to believe we're at this point in the year, we're all respectively working on our city budgets. And it looks like Valley Metro is doing the same thing. And I know, Scott, you have a presentation along with Paul. And just kind of reading through the materials, it seems like there's a few options in there. And I know you got a very complete presentation and storyline here. So I'm going to turn it over to you and look forward to receiving that information. So Mr. Smith, if you will.
Thank you, Eric. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul with just a brief introduction. I think you all know that we are dealing in certainly unique times. I guess the old adage that may you all be born in interesting times certainly applies to all of us right now. As Paul goes through the budget, as we do our budget, I'd just like to maybe point out one thing that is unique and as a challenge for us here at Valley Metro, and that is that the way that our system is paid for, in many ways, starts at your level. We provide services that the cities request, and I think if we look at about 67% of our services actually are paid for by cities. We have, and in our budget, we have a combination of really four sources or three sources in the Valley Metro budget, and that would be our regional public transportation fund, or our Prop 400 monies. The second would be our fare revenue, and the third would be right now, which is a new introduction because we generally don't get federal funds, but we certainly now have had two specific issue or events that are transit specific, CARES Act and then CRISA, and then it looks like we're going to have a third one. How all those things have interacted have really, and what the future holds as it relates to your share, which is the sales taxes that you collect in the individual cities, and whether you fund us through a dedicated tax or fund us through your general fund. Those all things go into matter, and Paul, to his credit, is trying to balance the interests of everybody and come up with a budget that he believes, from his professional experience, most accurately reflects where we're going to be. So with that I just say, as you listen to him, keep that in mind, that all those different sources, and some of them are certainly not unique to us. You deal with the same issues. Some of them are, such as how we've applied the federal money and the CARES money and the CRISA money, which is a little bit different. So as Paul goes through his presentation, I just ask you to keep that in mind and ask any questions you might have to help us prepare for the board discussion. So Paul, I'll turn it over to you and you can take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Chair, members of the boards, I do have a brief presentation on our annual budget for fiscal 22. I want to start a little bit with kind of what we've done to get to this point. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we really start our budget process in September of every year, working through two main groups. We have a financial working group, which is made up of staff from all of your cities, and the Audit and Finance Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the joint boards. So back in September, October, we started working through kind of our key assumptions, our revenue forecasts. We get end of October, we have some preliminary operating budgets that we distribute. So we sent those at the end of October. We've continued to refine those, present updated assumptions, and present the budgets to the Financial Working Group and the Audit Finance Subcommittee. So right now we're in March here, looking at annual budgets as a presentation for information and feedback so that we can continue moving forward. So going to the next slide. One of the key things that we started discussing back in September was what revenue forecast to use. We were just, a few months into COVID. We'd had a few months where revenues declined a little. We weren't really sure where we were going. We knew we had the CARES Act, but many of those programs expired at the end of December, particularly things like unemployment insurance and things that were helping to support the economy and support tax revenues. So there was a lot of uncertainty at the time. So we developed internally three different revenue forecast scenarios, labeled here scenario 1, scenario 2, and scenario 3, to use for planning purposes as we move forward through the budget. At the end of September, ADOT published their official forecast, so I've included that. So we really have four different forecasts that we've been looking at and working with. So 2021, the year we're in, 171 million roughly for the ADOT forecast. We have about 166 million in our budget, and then a couple of the scenarios. Scenario 2 is really based off of how our revenues reacted after 9/11. Kind of went flat for a couple of years and then continued to grow. Scenario 3 is modeled more after what happened with the Great Recession, with several years of declining revenues before we saw additional growth. So we just kind of have those in the back pocket. Knowing we wanted to then monitor trends in fiscal 21 compared to those fiscal 21 numbers and come to a point where we would decide what was the most appropriate revenue forecast to use for the final budget presented to the boards for adoption in May. So if we go to the next slide, showing our PTF revenues so far this year, we've received revenues through January. We are currently about $8.2 million above budget. It's a little over 8%. And the other thing I would point out is that our 21 actuals compared to budget, or even the 20 actuals, it's been a fairly consistent month to month, $1 million to $1.5 million. November was a little bit less, but it's been fairly consistent growth year over year when we look at each month. So it wasn't a couple of big months and then decline. So it was pretty consistent. And if we look at the next slide, kind of if the trend continues with our revenues for the last 5 months of fiscal 21, we would be looking at the bar on the right, about $181, maybe $182 million in revenue. Comparing that to our 4 forecast scenarios, it's clearly higher than even the ADOT official forecast. So we're trending in a very positive direction. And so as we look at what forecast, and actually you can go to the next slide, what we're going to use for our budget, what you will see today is a budget that's based off the scenario 1 forecast, the $174 million in PTF. But when the decision that we'll need to make is whether to keep that for the final budget or based on the trend, go to the ADOT forecast, which is about $4.5 million higher. So what I would say is I'm looking for really, we should get our February revenues in the next probably 7 to 10 days. I'm looking for a continuation of that trend year over year. And then as Scott mentioned, there's another stimulus package working its way through Congress. That's expected to be approved by March 14th to ensure that some benefits don't lapse. So a positive trend continuing on the revenues and passage of that stimulus proposal, I would certainly feel comfortable flipping to the higher ADOT forecast for fiscal 22, which has some implications for the budget. So if we could go to the next slide. So the scenarios that we've been working on look at some of the impacts to regionally funded service. That's scenario 1, which is the slightly more conservative forecast than ADOT's official, really does not allow us to make any of the improvements that are being worked on through the short-range transit program for fiscal 22 or potentially even through the remainder of the TLCP. That's important because there are a couple of things, particularly in fiscal 22. There's some small improvements in Scottsdale to match service frequencies with Phoenix, but there's also a funding swap for Mesa. I believe it's Route 30, currently funded by Mesa, is scheduled to become regionally funded in the Transit Lifecycle Program. That has definite budget implications for Mesa's local budget if that can't happen. Looking beyond fiscal 22, there are some additional scenarios or additional routes where that funding swap is scheduled in the TLCP, particularly Route 83 in Peoria. I believe there are a couple routes in Glendale. So using that more conservative forecast does not have the revenues to support those types of changes. Whereas moving to the higher ADOT forecast, which has higher revenues, particularly in the first few years, the next 2 to 3 years, would allow for some of those changes. We've also been asked to look kind of at some of the local revenue trends. Those contingency plans, the scenarios are really focused on the service that's regionally funded, but a lot of the service that Valley Metro provides is locally funded, particularly Valley Metro Rail. So the AFS had asked us to monitor some of the local trends. So what we're showing here is a selection from cities around the valley. It's Glendale's transportation tax, Phoenix's T2050 tax, Tempe's transit tax, and then Mesa's transaction privilege tax revenues that go into the general fund. So I wanted to keep apples to apples. So these are all transaction privilege tax based. Green bars are the budgeted amount, what was expected for growth or a decline in a couple of cases. The purple bar is what the experience has been so far. And in all cases, our experience for the cities has been better than budget, but you can see there's some significant differences among the cities. Tempe, for instance, is a slight decline through December. They recently sent their January revenues, and that resulted in a slight increase year over year, year to date by about 0.5%. So they're pretty much flat, but some of the other cities are seeing much better growth similar to what we've seen with the regional funds. So some of the key assumptions, the feedback we've heard so far from both the Financial Working Group and the Audit Finance Subcommittee, again, be a little bit conservative. To that end, we've based this budget that you'll see today on our scenario 1, the slightly more conservative revenue forecast. We've also assumed ridership to be fairly flat, that we won't see a significant increase or return of ridership in fiscal 22, that it would take more time to bring some of those riders back. And similarly with fares, much, about a third of our pre-COVID levels. So we would see a little bit of a little growth in our fare revenues, but certainly not back to our pre-COVID. We've incorporated the CRRSA funds, the CARES Act 2, if you will. Those final amounts have yet to be determined or to be approved by the MAG Regional Council. We're estimating up to about $20 million available for RPTA to use in the budget. I will note that we've only programmed 90% of those funds, so we're holding back about 10% to ensure that we don't overprogram whatever the final number comes out of MAG, and also to have some amount for unanticipated costs. We do anticipate returning to front door boardings next year. Don't know exactly when, but we do expect to have all of the operator barriers installed regionally by some point in June, which will help to facilitate that return to front door. Looking at some of the base service levels in the budget, as you can see, we have a significant amount that's locally funded from your city budgets. We have some that's regionally funded at a PTF, about 14.3 million miles, revenue miles in total among the different contracts that we fund or operate. Next slide, quick look at some of our key assumptions for our bus operations, Valley Metro operated. You can see our boardings, a little bit of an increase on the fixed route, and a little bit of a return on our fare revenues from 2.2 million. Although we are underrunning fare revenues this year, so our actual fare revenues are probably half that for the year. A little bit of an increase back to about 2.8, but clearly not back to even our fiscal 20 levels. Looking at our paratransit operations, a decrease in our forecasted demand. We continue to underrun our forecasted demand in fiscal 21. We had 433,000. I think we're well below that so far. So a little decrease in our estimate for next year, slightly lower cost since it's demand-based. Average fare about $4. I think because we do a lot of rounding, it doesn't work out to quite $4, but it is $4 a trip for paratransit. On our ride choice, our other demand-based service, again, a decrease in our forecasted demand for fiscal 22, a little slight decrease in the gross operating cost for those, and a little bit of an increase in our average fare. The fare works a little differently on ride choice depending on the length of the trip. So looking at just kind of our overall uses for RPTA, our largest category is our passenger services, bus, paratransit, van pool. Capital activities would be second, fiscal administration and regional services. Looking at our sources of funds on the next slide, overall, the largest categories are public transportation funds. Between what comes in for the bus program and the rail program is about half of our funding. We do have a significant amount of federal supporting the program for both the capital and also the CRRSA for operations. Looking at our uses, a couple of things I want to note. The demand service operations, 33% increase is a little bit misleading. This includes reimbursements to cities, in particular the city of Phoenix, for ADA paratransit service. In fiscal 21, City of Phoenix applied a lot of CARES Act funds against their paratransit. So our reimbursement to them was much lower than it normally would have been. So for fiscal 22, that's back to more of a normal level, which is why you see a larger increase there. Fixed route operations, about a 3% increase. What I would consider kind of our internal costs, our planning, our administration and finance, and then the regional services costs, which includes our marketing, call center, our mobility center, things like that. Overall, we're at about a decrease of $1 million from fiscal 21's budget. So in that sense, we've tried to be a little bit more conservative with the costs that we're incurring internally and trying as best we can to hold our operations steady if we can. On the sources of funds, biggest thing I would note here, a couple of things. We have the Federal CARES Act that was in fiscal 21. We anticipate that being fully used in 21 and not having any for 22, but we will use the CRRSA, and as I mentioned, we've programmed just a portion, about 90% of what we believe the allocation is, so just under $18 million. So between the two, that's a loss of, or a decrease of about $32 million in federal support, which is why you see a larger increase in both the public transportation funds and the transit service agreements, which is funding from all of the cities. So that's kind of the offset to the lower federal funds. Overall, looking at about $170 million operating budget. On the capital side, we're largely driven by fleet and fleet replacements. We do have some other areas, regional facilities, other regional projects. I believe there's a North Glendale Park and Ride included in the regional facilities. We have the fare collection system project that's being funded, and then debt service as well. So overall, fiscal 22, about a $74 million capital budget, which is about an $11 million decrease from 21. On the sources side, largely regional PTF and federal funds. We do anticipate using some of our fund balance for the capital portion. We try not to use fund balance to support operations with it that needs to operate in a surplus, but we do use our fund balance for capital. The other category that we track in our budget are what we consider pass-through funds, funds that we manage on behalf of the cities. For instance, the Arizona Lottery funds, we anticipate $11.2 million. Those come in, we distribute those out to the cities and towns to support public transportation. Valley Metro Rail, that is the salaries and fringe and overhead associated with the staff that manage Valley Metro Rail service. And the rail program disbursements, those are regional funds that come in and are dispersed to Valley Metro Rail to support the capital program. It's about $100 million in what we would consider pass-throughs. Funding sources for those primarily are regional public transportation funds, a little bit of fund balance, only about $1 million. The VMR reimbursements, that's tied directly to the salary and fringe and overhead that Valley Metro Rail reimburses our PTA. Looking at staffing, we do have, looking at 4 additional positions. The Agency Business Technology and Services is I believe is an IT position. A couple in operations and maintenance to support oversight, and a deputy director for bus or for transportation, and then a position to support safety, security, and quality assurance. So we would be, I will note the 2 mid-year additions were IT related as well, and they were contractor conversions. So we actually saved a little bit of money by bringing those in-house. So we would go from 240 positions that were in the 21 budget to 246 that are RPTA or shared staff with Valley Metro Rail. So just a last slide, coming back to our timeline. As I mentioned, we're presenting for information purposes to get feedback in any direction you might have to support the process. Next month, we'll be looking at presenting the 5-year plans, our forecasts through the Financial Working Group and Audit Finance Subcommittee. And then we plan to bring back in May our final budget for adoption. And as I mentioned, the budget there could look a little bit different. Assuming that our revenue trends continue, we would likely pivot to the slightly higher ADOT forecast. And those revenues would be used to support, those additional revenues would be used to support service. We wouldn't add any funding back to any of those regional services or planning or administration costs. So we would come back in May. That gives us a month buffer. If there's not a comfort level in May, we could make some, continue to make some adjustments and come back for a final adoption in June if we need to, but we're hoping for May. So with that, Mr. Chair, say a few slides, but a lot of, tried to give a lot of background. I will note that the full budget documents have been posted on our website if anybody is interested in looking through the detail, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committees have.
Thank you, Paul. I will entertain questions from the committee. Nice presentation.
Mr. Chair, Stephen Methvin, Tempe.
Yes, go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you. Hey, Paul, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative and helpful to me. Would you mind going back to slide 49? So I have one question and one comment. I'll do the comment first. And I believe you've accurately reflected Tempe's situation here. The one piece that you didn't have an opportunity to discuss, and it was probably just due to time, is that as the costs increase, so will that gap between the two. So our revenues collection well, our costs are increasing at such a pace that our gap is widening. And so that's my comment. My question is, has Valley Metro done any analysis? Because when I look at the two with the largest green, it's Glendale and Tempe, and we're both cities, along with Phoenix, that have dedicated transit taxes. And I'm just wondering if you've done any analysis that perhaps we're growing and expanding our services at a rate that is just not sustainable for us. And I'm wondering if you have done or you have any comments on that.
Mr. Methvin, we certainly, well, let me speak for the regional funds. The Transit Lifecycle Program is our 20-year plan. We update that. We try to update it annually to ensure that the service and the capital projects included are sustainable at least through the life of Prop 400. We work very closely with the cities through the Service Planning Working Group to try to ensure that we are providing the level of service that the cities feel are sustainable. I mean, we don't necessarily look into each city's transit fund to determine whether it's sustainable. We try to work with the cities to figure out what those appropriate service levels are. I don't know if that really answers your question, but we do our best to work with each city, given that each city's situation is unique. We do our best to try to address your needs.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I'm just wondering what common factors are out there between Glendale and Tempe that has caused, to have our forecast be, ours is definitely more flat than Tempe's, is definitely more flat than Glendale's. But, as our cost increase, that gap will really become so much more prevalent. And it sort of, we end up lagging behind the rest of the valley. And I'm wondering, what options we have. Certainly we've been talking with Valley Metro for some time about reducing costs, and that's, to help our transit funds stay afloat, because we've had to cut $9.5 billion recently out of our transit fund. And, that's not a good position to be in, but it's a unique position to Tempe. And I hadn't really compared where we are with other Valley cities. So this is actually a really interesting chart to me.
Hey, Stephen, if I could, and you
Sure.
hit on the head, I think what is one of the challenges we have going forward as a region. We've done an analysis as to funding sources and service decisions, and we find that really we have a system that is somewhat in conflict. And that is because we talk here at Valley Metro, we do everything through a service planning group, through the through the transit life cycle plan. But in reality, the majority of funding for transit services are not at the Valley Metro or the regional level, they're at the city level. So in many ways, it's driven from below as opposed to above. As a matter of fact, we went in and did an analysis, and there's, I think, 75 or 76 total bus routes. That's all local routes, express routes, and circulators that operate in the Valley. Of those 75, 76 routes, only 3 are funded completely with regional funds by Valley Metro. There's 27 routes, I believe it is, Paul, if I'm not wrong, that are mixed funded, a mixture between city funds and regional funds. And there's another 30 plus routes that are funded solely by cities, most of those being the circulators and in Phoenix. You can see that then the levels of service we provide, and oh, by the way, that means I think it's between 60 and 70% of the total transit funding in the Valley comes from cities, not from the region. So there is somewhat of a cross-pollination, because each city, of course, can only buy the transit that they can afford to buy. But every decision they've made, since we have so many hybrid type routes, affect their neighboring cities and affect the region. But they really are bottom-up kind of discussions and decisions, because the majority of the funding comes from the cities, not from Valley Metro. So we try to balance all that off and let cities know where we are, but we really do have a challenge in accommodating or dealing with the kinds of situations you're talking about, where cities are at different levels, have different desires, and we need to really recognize that as we go into these discussions on regional service that really is funded for the most part by local cities.
Sure. Yeah. And, the purple bar is, very, very telling for our city alone, Scott. And that is that we're just not keeping up with our sales tax is not keeping up with the level of service. And it's not keeping up with the level of cost increase for the region. So.
Well, and this really plays in as we're talking about Prop 400 extension. And this is where we've talked about this before. The expectations about the ability to expand service and fill in gaps really, I think, jumps ahead of the game, because we really need to have an honest discussion of what the future of funding on an overall basis the transit system is. Because the system we have now does create the kind of scenarios that is shown very graphically in this graph. And how do we accommodate Tempe's reality with the other desires and needs of neighboring cities in the region as a whole? I don't have an answer for that. That's really a discussion that I think we need to have as a region and as management staff, because it's really staff driven in the sense that we deal with the technical side of things. And I can tell you that when we get to the electeds, the desires and the expectations are on a different level. We really do have a challenge in defining our regional system going forward.
Yeah, I mean, what's so obvious to us and to you, Scott, is that we're not proposing adding any service, yet our costs continue to increase at a rate that we're not going to be able to sustain.
Well, are we talking about bus costs or rail costs? Because those are also in a very different.
Definitely, rail costs are more concerning than bus costs for Tempe.
Yeah, and rail costs, a lot of it is based on the fact that rail operations are very different in the sense that you have an expanded system. You're taking on streetcar in Tempe, but also we have a system that has a much more significant state of good repair needs, and the maintenance and other things are a different level for rail operations than they are for bus. Most of bus costs are set in as Paul mentioned, are set in stone by the contracts we have with our service providers, and they're pretty much based on revenue miles we offer and we pay for, and that's contractual. So the one way to reduce costs on the bus side, really for any level, because as you saw in Paul's presentation, our administrative and other costs are relatively small, just like in your cities. We're a people business, and so the vast majority of our costs are in personnel and real costs related to providing the service. And so those are the things. That's where you get into service discussions. But we're not there yet. And the one reason why we believe Paul gave such a detailed explanation is to point out some of these difficult discussions, because we recognize that there are some tough choices, because things look pretty good, but we do have pockets, as you mentioned there in Tempe, where we have real issues and
Yeah.
real concerns, and we have to balance those out.
Well, I appreciate you saying that and acknowledging that, because the only way we're going to get out of this is if we work together. So I appreciate that, and I don't want to dominate the conversation here. I see a couple other hands up. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Paul.
Additional questions?
Eric, this is Ed. I think from that last conversation, the previous slide, scenario one makes even more sense. There's not a lot of purpose in making improvements before we know the fate of Prop 400. You're simply putting service in place. Simply putting service in place that may not continue, or that may be not the service you want to continue. So I think that's an important piece. The other thing I would say is I would say we should probably consider slowing down our number of our planning projects that we've got going on. I know in many cases cities are funding their own planning, which is fine. But in terms of making big regional plans right now, it doesn't seem to make sense until we know what's going on with Prop 400. Thank you.
And just so we're clear, Ed, we appreciate that. And we are looking at planning. Scenario one is a conservative that reduces the amount of funding under current levels. So just so we know, scenario is not the status quo. That is a reduction. As you can see, it defers previously planned mostly service swaps, not expansions of service, or funding swaps, I mean. So we just want to be clear, as when we talk about these scenario ones, you have the status quo or the based on revenue, and then you have different contingencies that what if the revenue doesn't hold up. So I just want to be clear that scenario one is not the status quo. It's a reduction from what we have and would have impact on cities specifically related to the funding swaps.
Thank you.
So
Eric?
Yes. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, so Kevin, I'll let you go next. I guess I'm a little perplexed, to be honest. When we're at MAG, we rely upon the ADOT numbers. Am I not correct? And we're relying on them to do a 20-year forecast. I don't know why we would think it would be any different over here. And so in my mind, if it's good enough for MAG, it's good enough for Valley Metro. And I recognize that, and I don't think that slide 46 is I think we're misinterpreting that. It was a comparison of forecast versus performance. And a lot of us, maybe at the beginning of the COVID, readjusted or what, I'm sorry, I said, I don't know what the slide that showed the green and that showed the forecasted versus collections. All that demonstrated was that some of us maybe adjusted our budget significantly down on revenues in anticipation of a significant downturn in the economy. And then maybe we outperformed our forecast significantly. I'm having to explain to my council, what were you holding back on me, Mr. City Manager? You really blew it back in April because you told us things were going to be really bad, and it really isn't. It's actually doing better than we ever expected. I think that's what's happening throughout the region. There may be some that are flat, but I'm not aware of too many cities that are doing less than what they had probably at the beginning of the fiscal year had anticipated. But also, just going back to the ADOT forecast, I'm not comfortable trying to suggest that somehow the region and Valley Metro is not going to receive enough revenues to continue on the existing plans and programs that some of us have anticipated going forward. I really do think we need to stick with the plans. Some of us that have built that into our assumptions. And I don't see anything in these revenue projections that would suggest that we need to make a modification. If nothing else, I would suggest we take advantage of the federal dollars because we don't really have to use our dollars to support or hold up the operations because the sales tax is coming in so strong, we probably ought to take this federal dollars and figure out a way to invest in something that will give us a long-term return in our equipment or facilities. So just a different perspective, but I would take this as a positive. It looks like revenues are coming in. We've managed the expenditures. We've got funding coming in from the federal government. We need to find a way to take advantage of this unique opportunity to invest in our system. And I think we need to go back to the fundamentals that we rely upon ADOT revenues and MAG. That's good enough for MAG. It's good enough for this agency also. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Are there other questions?
Yeah, Eric, Kevin.
Yeah, jump right in, Kevin.
Yeah, and I'll jump on board with Chris's comments as well. We rely heavily on ADOT. I think that we would feel more comfortable using the ADOT assumptions for revenue. When we did there was no exact science when we tried to adjust to the pandemic. But what I can tell you is we adjusted it downward to be conservative, but we didn't have to drastically change our service levels in doing so. I'm concerned that if we get too conservative on our assumptions for revenue, that we'll be forced to make early programmatic changes that will be harder to restore perhaps down the road if the revenues do indeed meet kind of the ADOT forecast. I'd rather manage this along the way. And if all of a sudden 6 months into the budget process, we see that the ADOT numbers are tending to trend a little bit more aggressive, Scott and his team can come back easily with some proposed budget changes to get us back in balance. But I would feel far more comfortable of adopting the ADOT forecast, and I believe that my member who represents us on the board will also communicate that as well.
And Kevin, just so you know, the scenarios that Paul put out were intended to be those contingencies that what if actual experience does not match what we thought they would, then those are the places we would go. I think what the challenge is whether those are the contingencies or whether they're the starting point.
Yeah,
that's what you're addressing.
Yeah, Scott, thanks. I guess where I was coming from is that I've had some concerns that the Audit and Finance Committee, for example, has kind of recommended a conservative approach on revenues. And so all I'm saying is that I think I understood the different scenarios, but I would feel more comfortable again going forth in assuming the ADOT, and then we'll already know how we can manage some of the changes if needed be.
Right, and if I'm hearing you right, just to make sure we understand, the ADOT would be the starting point. That would be the budget that Paul prepared.
Correct.
And the scenarios would be our contingency plans if we see a reality that deviates from the ADOT projection. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, well, yeah, because am I not correct that that there has been some direction provided by the Audit and Finance Committee to be a little bit more conservative on the assumptions?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying to speak more to that. From our perspective as MAG managers, I would say that we would encourage the more aggressive. And then again, I appreciate you've laid out already some scenarios that we can easily adapt if needed be.
Thank you, Kevin. Are there any other comments from the committee members? Anyone else want to weigh in? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so indulge me. I'm going to take my hat off as chair and speak from a Peoria perspective. I agree with what Kevin and Chris are saying. I think the ADOT projections would be the one of preference. I don't see anything to dissuade me from thinking they're off in any way. I think the prospect of additional stimulus money coming in will assist. I also agree fully that on the MAG Prop 400E discussion, moving forward is predicated on the full TLCP, and adjusting that would throw a little bit of a spanner in the works, but it could be worked through. So I'm in agreement. I think Paul's done a tough job of navigating, but the appropriate at the same time of looking at different options. And what it sounds like to me is we'll basically move forward. Think optimistically. Well, we've got scenarios in place, and I agree with Kevin. If something happens, we'll manage our way through this as we always do. So I'd just like to share that and thank you for your indulgence. And I will now put my hat back on as chair and ask a final time if there are any other considerations or questions from the committee on this particular item. And if you could, Scott, real quickly summarize the next of where it goes at this point.
I'll let Paul, since he's more in tune with it. This was an information presentation, but Paul, you want to take it from here?
Sorry, pardon me, Mr. Chair. I only heard half of what you said, what your next steps for the budget.
Next steps and where do we go? Based on the conversation you've heard today, what would be the next, how would you move forward?
So we will take the feedback. Obviously, we're going to take this through the Audit and Finance Subcommittee tomorrow and the board later this month. We'll take any additional feedback from both of those groups. But I would certainly feel comfortable moving to the ADOT forecast as our base. So we would make those adjustments throughout April, update the budget documents that are posted, so that when we come back in May, what you would see is the higher revenue forecast with adjustments only to operations, not to any of our internal planning or admin or any of that.
Thank you, Paul, for that summary. This was an informational item, so unless there are any additional questions, Mr. Smith, we'll move on to the next item. And that would be future agenda items, requests, and report on any current events that any of the members would like to share. Do we have anything today? All right. If not, our next meeting will be on Wednesday, April 7th at 11 a.m. So with that, thank you everyone for attending today. Great conversation. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more as we go down the road here. So thank you, and we'll see you next month.
Rail members, stay on.
Yes, I'll turn it over to Chris now. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Eric.
Chris, I have to jump off at 1 o'clock.
Mr. Zerker, will somebody be taking your place?
Yeah, Jesus, I think is available.
Yes, I'm on tap and I'm available to take over.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Brady, we're ready to go whenever you are. If Mr. Brady, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Well, we were having a great conversation. Sorry you missed it. I was done with the meeting. I was wondering, nobody was opposing the item. I was done. Okay, here we go.
We were listening
Public
intently
comment.
to your silence.
It was awesome. Okay, welcome to the Rail Management Committee meeting. First item is public comment. Pat, all public comment is submitted in written format, and you will have those. Is that correct?
Yes, if we receive any. I haven't received any yet today.
All right, so the next item is minutes from the January 6, 2021 RMC meeting. They're presented for approval. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Ed, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, who is that?
Peters with Glendale. All right, sorry, Glendale.
All right, okay. All right, okay. So we have a motion and a second. All those opposed, if any? If not, minutes are approved. The next item is the consent agenda. We have items 3A through 3D. Are there any items from the members that need to be removed from the consent agenda? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move approval.
I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Move to approve, Stephen.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. So I have a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda. Are there any who oppose? Very good. We're now at item 4, which is the Valley Metro fiscal year preliminary operating and capital budget presentation. Mr. Smith, I know how well you are at numbers and budget, so should we just go right to Paul?
Yeah, let's just go right to Paul.
Okay, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Quick presentation. I shouldn't take as long as the RPTA one. A couple of similar slides that I'll jump through fairly quickly. Again, just looking at our progress. This is an information item today, looking for feedback from the committee on the preliminary budget. Some of the key assumptions and feedback that we've received on the next slide. Again, to be a little bit more conservative for our revenues, so ridership and fares in particular, we're looking at forecasting basically flat ridership from the current trend, at fares at about a quarter of our pre-COVID levels. And again, we have the additional CRRSA funding coming in. It's a typo on the slide that should say about $20 million for VMR as well, roughly $20 million that we expect. So we've programmed, as with RPTA, about 90% of that into the budget. Looking at our baseline light rail operations, again, about 6.3 million boardings, up a little bit from 21, but certainly not back to pre-COVID levels. Fare revenues fairly flat, maybe even down slightly. Operating costs about 61.8 million. I will note that the preliminary budget we sent out in October was about 64.2, so we've brought that down by several million. We continue to work on trying to get that a little bit lower if we can for the final budget. Next, on the streetcar, we've made some assumptions here about revenue service date. I believe for budget purposes, we're assuming October 1st, but we continue to monitor the delivery and acceptance of the Brookville streetcars to finalize when revenue service will actually take place. But for the budget, it's, I believe, 9 months based on October 1st. We continue to work with the City of Tempe on those operating costs and what's included. So we'll hopefully have more information on that in May. So overall, capital and operating, as you can see, overwhelmingly the budget is capital activities for the extensions, the construction activities that we have going on, passenger services next, regional transit services, which is basically planning and agency administration. On our sources, largest source here is member city contributions. As you know, all the 3 rail cities provide all of the funding for light rail and streetcar operations. We can't use any regional funds for that. The regional funds in the budget are primarily for planning and also to support some of the capital construction. Looking at the uses by category, light rail operations and maintenance, we see an increase of about $3.1 million over fiscal 21. I'd like to point out that about 1.1 million of that is based on due to the increase in our insurance premiums. We had a significant increase this year. So that's about almost a third of the increase is due to insurance. Light rail security, about a $1.1 million increase. I will note that we are hoping that that will come down a little bit. We are currently negotiating our new contract, which should take effect in July. We had programmed a little additional contingency because we didn't know what those new rates would be. But we hope to bring that 9.6 million down just a little bit more for the fiscal 22 when we come back in May. Again, streetcar, about 4.3 million for the operations and maintenance, and about 700,000 for security. we may be able to bring that down. As I said, we're still negotiating with Tempe on what that level of security, the appropriate level of security would be for streetcar. About $12 million for our planning budget and about $2 million for agency operating. On the sources of funds, just a couple of things I do want to point out. The member city contributions are up significantly, but that's, as I mentioned, largely because it's the city funds that fund operations. CARES funds will all be used in 21. That was 43 million. Chris is about 18.5 that we've programmed. So that decrease in the federal support there is primarily what's driving the member city contributions, in addition to the increases for service costs. On the capital side, it's about a $483 million budget, down slightly from fiscal 21. We'll continue going strong on the South Central Extension, Downtown Hub, and Northwest Phase 2. Streetcars should be wrapping up. Those should just be some closeout costs as we get into fiscal 22, mostly vehicle related, I would think. OMC expansion should be completed. Gilbert Road extension, that's complete. We're just finishing up paying for the Siemens vehicles as they come in. System-wide improvements, about $35 million. We do have a couple of projects in there, some crossover and a new crossover and some switches that are dependent on having funding availability as we look through the TLCP for the rail program. On the sources, largely federal funds, a significant amount there. You'll see a big decline from 21 to 22, and that's primarily because I would say 21 was an anomaly. We signed our full funding grant agreement for South Central, and we're able to, we should be able to draw down at least $200 million of that full funding grant agreement. Many of that, a lot of that is for previous year's work as we're able to go back to the beginning of the project. So a little bit of an anomaly there just because we signed the FFGA, but the $171 million in 22 is probably more of a normal level moving forward. $262 million in member city contributions, and then about $50 million in our regional funds. On the staffing for Valley Metro Rail, and this is Valley Metro Rail only, there would be 2 additions in fiscal 22. One is a deputy director for rail, and one is in our safety, security, and quality assurance to support that program. We have a significant number of federal requirements around safety and quality assurance, and so that's to support that program. So we'd be moving from 203 positions to 205 in fiscal 22. So we provided some updated information to your staff. I hadn't really planned on showing this slide, but the full budget document is on the website if you're interested. And kind of back to the timeline, again, this is for information and feedback. Be happy to take any comments you have on the draft, on the document, and we'll make some adjustments through April and come back in May, hopefully for adoption. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul? All right, Paul, I think just, I would just comment that, all of us are trying to manage those operating expenses and just be real careful how those escalate. I think everybody's going to be comparing their own experience. I think we just need the rail side and both sides just to be careful on that operating side, keeping those dollars manageable within the rate of inflation or revenue. So let's just, if you can stay on top of those, I think we'll be all interested in seeing how that moves along, I guess.
Yes, thank you.
Any questions? All right, so this was for information as I see it on the agenda. There's no questions for Paul on the budget. We'll go to item number 5 for future agenda items, request and report on current events. Any of that? Item 5. If not, our next meeting of the RMC is scheduled for Wednesday, April 7th at 11 a.m. Pat, how do we do? Are we done?
We are, sir. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day, everyone.
We'll be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.